Hey folks, welcome to episode 61 of the podcast. A few quick things before we get to the awesome interview I did with Maija Soderholm. It's, as always, you can find all the links that I will mention in the episode at wimsblog.com/61, number 61. Second part, as always, also the shout out. This time, I'm gonna give a huge thanks to Mark B, who has been with me as a patron for a little while now. I think last year that Mark became a patron. So thank you, Mark, for your support, and also obviously also all my other patrons. You want to support the show and all my work? That is excellent. You can go to wimsblog.com/donate, and there you will find all the different ways you can do that. Straight to the Patreon. That's patreon.com/Demeere. That's my name. And you can find a library of, and this is the fifth year that I'm doing this, so a huge library of content, a lot of stuff that you might find interesting. So check that out. Right, so that's pretty much it. We are going to get rolling right away with the interview. There are two parts. This is the first part, the public part. The second part is the bonus episode that we recorded, Maija and I, over on Patreon, where she answers questions from my patrons. So that's also one of the perks of being a patron, is that you get to ask questions to the guests, and I then ask them. That's the fun part for me and the advantage for you. All right, we're going to get rolling right away. The very first part of the conversation, I did not get on the recording because of some Zoom issues, but it was just Maija and I just talking and saying hi. And you'll notice that we roll right into a conversation. Right, that's it. A little bit of a Dexter vibe to it, I gotta say. You
Yeah,
ever
I
watched
know.
that series, Dexter?
Yeah, well, don't worry about the background. It's construction site. This is dust wall, everybody. Dust wall. And I have no heating, so this is why I'm wearing like outside clothes inside my house.
Okay. All right. So we're going to get started. First off, a big welcome to everybody. This is episode 61 of the podcast. And I'm sure we will have some show notes, so you can see those at wimsblog.com/61, those two numbers. I want to mention a huge welcome to Maija Soderholm. First off, Maija, am I pronouncing that right?
Yeah, Maija. Maija,
Maija.
yes.
Okay,
Yeah,
right. And
yeah.
and
Maija is
Soderholm?
yes. Soderholm.
Soderholm. Okay,
I
good.
want to really do it, but yeah, I answer to anything similar, really.
Okay.
Having grown
Well,
up answering to things similar, not my real name.
well, as somebody with a name that most English speakers can't pronounce correctly either, I always try to be a little bit respectful because I know the experience is sometimes like I've been called so many things.
I feel your pain. I feel your pain. But
All right.
it doesn't matter. As you know, if you're trying to talk to me, I answer to most things.
Okay.
Well,
Well,
even hey asshole.
yeah, I've heard that one a few times, going my way as well.
Yeah.
Usually deservedly. So just maybe a quick intro. I mean, many people know you from the Filipino martial arts, but I just wanted to hear you talk a little bit about how did you get started in the martial arts. What are all the things that you've done and so on? Because I think there's a lot more there than just the Filipino martial arts.
Well, sure. I'm old enough. I'm older than most people in the martial arts still. I mean, there's a few of us at the end, over here. But I grew up in the 70s and the 80s. And I was an enormous fan of all the swashbuckling movies. So Errol Flynn was who I wanted to be. I desperately wanted to be Errol Flynn. Actually, I wanted to be Robin Hood or Captain Blood or, one of the guys. I didn't actually want to be the actor, obviously, or I wanted to be one of the Three Musketeers or something. I loved swashbuckling movies. No idea why, just loved them. And so when I was about 9, my parents said, oh, look, there's a fencing class you could go to. So I went to, that's when I started fencing, was when I was about 9. And I really liked it. I really enjoyed it. It was really fun playing with swords. But when I got to about the age of 13, I guess school took over and I really needed to focus a bit more on my studies and stuff. And obviously, when you're a teenager, your social life kicks in too. So it doesn't become quite as exciting to go practice weird things like fencing. So that was the end of that until after I graduated university, actually, or right around that time, I was living in a different place and working out at a gym. This would be the 80s now. And one of the guys who always used to be there at the same time as me, which was super early in the morning when the gym was quite empty, was kind of doing this interesting kind of training that I hadn't really seen before. He was doing these very slow reps with very slow reverses, and he was standing kind of weird. And I was like, what are you doing? He's like, I think I'm to a Tai Chi class. I was like, oh, really? So I'm using the concepts for lifting weights. So this idea of having a proper stance before you lift, and having your feet parallel, and the whole 9 yards, and then, really concentrating on reverses and things. And so I was like, oh, that sounds kind of interesting. And it turned out that the class was literally around my house, around the corner from my house. It was less than a minute's walk. And I was like, all right, let me go check it out. And it was in the UK, so it's winter, it's freezing, it's in some church hall, drafty old church hall with no heating. And there's this guy, and he makes us all stand in some posture, and he corrects us and everything. And I got super hot. My heart starts going, and I'm just like, whoa, this is super weird. So it got me intrigued. And so I just kind of kept going, and it was fun. And I realized that every time I left class, I would feel more energized, and it would actually make me want to run, which, if you know me, is hilarious because I hate running. It really put it a whole bunch of energy into my system. I was like, oh, this is great. So I carried on with that. And through that, I met my teacher's teacher, who came over for seminars from the US, actually. And I got a bit more into it, but, not super seriously. It was just kind of in between times. And then, the guy that was my original teacher, he gave up teaching because there's only a few of us, and his life took a different thing. So I didn't really think about it that much. But I guess it was always in my head. And you remember The Way of the Warrior, that TV series from 1986?
That gave me one of my biggest interests in Chinese martial arts.
Oh, totally. So, obviously, I got Errol Flynn at the beginning. So we'll infill the middle part with Kung Fu with David Carradine, sadly, because at the time it was really excellent. You watch it now and it just looks like he's on Quaaludes, the way he's moving and stuff, and obviously doesn't know anything. But then it was really cool. And I wanted to be able to bat the arrows out the way and stuff like that, So complete fantasy, motivations. Anyway, so I saw The Way of the Warrior, and I saw the Taiwan episode with Hong Yishan. And there was some dude walking circles, and I was like, what is that? I really want to be able to do that. And I'd seen a snippet of it at a weekend seminar that I went to, actually in Amsterdam. I sort of went over to see my teacher's teacher, who was teaching in Amsterdam. And he'd just shown it, and I was like, ooh, yeah. So then those two things combined kind of grabbed my interest a little bit. Still not that seriously. But when I came to the US, I actually came here as a student, I searched out some teachers, and I searched him out also, and it turned out he was in the Bay Area. And so I started training more, and then that kind of kept going and going. And it's kind of a mixture of Tai Chi mostly, and then Bagua, but Bagua just became my most favorite thing. And then at that point, Luodashe turned out to be somebody that was doing the rounds, doing seminars in the US, and I went to one of his seminars, and I just thought it was the best thing since sliced bread. I was like, yeah, this is definitely it. And then it turns out it was him that was in that Way of the Warrior clip, walking circle, at Hung Yishan's class. And I was like, how random is that? That's pretty random, right? And I kept doing that for a while. And then one day, my teacher at the time had a VHS tape playing of this guy moving around with swords. And I was like, oh my God, that's exactly what I've been looking for. It's like, I want that. That's it. It's like all this time, even though, I've kind of randomly fallen into things and they've grabbed my attention, that is actually what I want. I want to do that. And it was quite a long process to get accepted and into training, which is a interesting story by itself, but I don't know if we should go into it or not.
That's up to
you. I met him at a seminar. He came out to teach a seminar, which was quite rare for him to do in the neighborhood where he was teaching, Sunny, that is, Sunny Umpad. And I really wanted to make a good impression. And I knew that he made all his training weapons, so I invented this excuse to talk to him. So I made my own training weapon so that after the seminar, I could go have something to talk about.
Nice.
You know how it is after seminars, you want to say something useful and not just like, wow, that was really great. Like have like a real question, because you sound like such an idiot otherwise that you just want to go stand next to the famous person. So I wanted something real. So I fabricated these weapons. I had this big plan. I went to talk to him and he was super nice. And he said, oh yeah, no, those are great. And you should really think about this, and gave me some advice. And it's like, if you want to train with me, you're more than welcome to come to class.
Yes.
I was like, yes. But your teacher has to bring you, because you can't train with me unless your teacher says it's okay. And my teacher at the time refused to give me permission for 2 years.
Oh, geez, come on.
With the excuse that Sonny doesn't teach women.
Okay.
Which turned out to be completely false, but regardless. And in the end, I mean, I went traveling for a year, so part of that year was just me not sort of like bugging him. I came back and I wrote a letter and I was like, you're just being a sexist ass. You need to take me. I was just like done with it. And he took me the next week. It was really interesting. So I got accepted as a student at the Sunny, and I trained with him from 2000 until 2006 when he died. And that was pretty much my primary martial art, I would say, and that absolutely blew my mind. And it made all the Bagua make sense. It made Tai Chi make sense. It made fencing make sense. It made a whole bunch of things make sense. It was actually a really kind of life-transforming experience. So that's it. Here I am.
That's pretty good. That's a pretty good introduction, and a really awesome path just to get where you are now. And I find that many people have like stories along those lines, that you kind of stumble into something, into the next thing, and all of a sudden it's like, this is it. Like this is. I had that with my Tai Chi teacher, and I've told this story many times before. That first time I did, freestyle pushing hands, smallest guy in class tossed me around like a rag doll. I'm like, what the hell is going on around here? I'm this big, strong guy. I can fight, blah, blah, blah. And this small dude here, because I could, physically just pick him up and turn him upside down if I wanted to, but I couldn't beat him at that. And that really made me want to learn. And that was like, I think 25 years ago now. So yeah, that's great that you actually get to find, the teacher for you.
Well, yeah, and honestly, when people say, you must have searched hard and stuff, it's like, no, it's completely random. I don't know what to tell you. It's just, you got to keep going out there and trying things and, putting yourselves in places. And I was incredibly lucky. You could make it some sort of, what's the Chinese have an idea about destiny. I can't remember what the word is, that just being in the right place at the right time means in the sense that your destiny.
Yeah, it's kind of like your fate.
So I'm not sure, maybe.
Who knows? I wanted to ask you a little bit about Sonny, because obviously, he's kind of a mythical figure in the Filipino martial arts, and about his personality. I read that it was in, I think, the foreword of your book, The Liar, the Cheat, and the Thief, that he was kind of like a recluse. He booby-trapped his house. In my experience, people who are like that tend to have lived an interesting life and have had a certain kind of experiences. Is that something you can talk about, or?
Well, in general sense, mostly because I never asked him. I never delved. I never wanted to know. It made no difference. He had something that I couldn't do, and I couldn't understand what he was doing, and I wanted it. I wanted to understand, and so I went and I was purely a student. What I can tell you is he came from the Philippines to the US in 1969. I think he'd been kind of a tearaway kid back in the Philippines. Him and his brothers were all musicians and kind of partiers, so they were out at night. He did train with quite a lot of well-known people in the Philippines, like when he was young, like Ancien Bacon, for instance. So he was hooked up with a lot of different martial artists, and there's all kinds of stories about who these people were and where his lineages come from, because when you look at all the ways that he used the blade, for instance, doesn't look like only one thing. There's different aspects to it. So I suspect that's there. And he always had a passion for martial arts. When he came to the US, he felt like a small brown person in a white world, and he experienced a lot of racism, and He would walk around with two Bali songs on him all the time. He always kind of lived in shittier neighborhoods. So I don't know from his past exactly what happened, and I don't know when he came to the States what happened. I do know that he didn't sleep very well. He chain smoked, and he was afraid to sleep because he said all the ghosts are there. Yeah. And so I suspect there's a lot of darkness in his past, but I didn't delve, honestly.
Yeah, yeah. No, totally. I mean, obviously, I didn't mean to pry, but mostly it's that I know nothing of his past.
Oh no, and honestly, I don't want to talk out of turn because I actually have no idea. Yeah. I don't want to create some amazing stories that don't exist. But you didn't turn up at his house without him knowing that you were coming. You didn't bring a stranger to the house without him knowing. Do you know what I mean? Like, yeah, there was a line, and that line was interesting. And a few times I saw him lose his temper, and that was really, really scary. That was a very interesting experience. Because he didn't actually lose his temper, but there was a switch.
The switch went off, yeah. Yeah,
and you're like, oh, shit. And it was never with me, thank goodness. It was with other people. Because he taught out of his house, right? He taught out of his living room, and so his living room was like the workout space. If you look at the clips on YouTube, you'll see how it was arranged. There's like 2 couches and a TV and all these weapons. The training space was super tiny, and then it had this little balcony outside where you could sit if it wasn't your turn. Like maybe there was like 3 of you there, and you'd kind of cycle in, and so you'd be watching. So the time that that happened, I was sitting outside on the, just watching this other guy flowing with him. And it was like, some young dude, and he was just kind of oblivious. And he was, getting a bit cocky and trying it on and being a bit of an ass, right? And Sonny was like, don't do that, don't do that. And then guys like kind of getting him, thinking it's all like great and fantastic and having a good time, just completely oblivious. And Sonny's like, you want to go? And he says, it's really, really, really quiet. You want to go? You pick anything off this wall, we'll go. You want to go now? You want to go now? And all the hairs on my neck and on my body stood up. Even saying it now, it's like it's having that same effect. And I was like, oh, shit. And it's like with every sort of intent in my body, I was trying to drag this young guy out of the room, like sucking him out, because he's all like, what, zero idea what was going on. And he was like, what, And I was like, get out. And eventually he's like, oh, it suddenly occurred to him, and he was like, oh, I'm sorry. And so then I reached in and I kind of grabbed him out, and then Sonny disappeared, and I was like, oh, man. Yeah. What do I do now? Do I stay?
Not easy.
Right. And 5 minutes later, he reappeared, completely calm. Yeah. And he pulled off live blades off the wall, and he points to me and says, all right, you and me flow now.
No stress.
Terrified.
I can imagine.
But it was an amazing experience of focusing your mind. Yeah. It's like, don't cut the teacher. Don't cut the teacher.
Well, that's kind of, that is one of the reasons why I asked if you knew anything about his past, because there is a significant difference between, well, in my experience at least, and in my opinion, between people who have lived a certain life, have had certain kind of experiences, especially when it comes to violence, and how it influences their art, how they teach, how they practice, what they will put up with, what they won't. One of my teachers, I mean, when you push hands with him, people who would try stuff that, and there's always people who try stuff that you're not supposed to do, you get an elbow in the face. And you don't complain because you started it. They finished it, but you started. And same thing. I get very upset when we practice with weapons and people start, improvising or stepping outside of what we're supposed to do and just like try to play tag. I'm like, the only reason that we can do this safely is because I'm covering for your nonsense, and I'm making sure that nobody gets hurt. But yes, you can hurt me. You can kill me with the practice weapon. But the only reason you can do that is because I am sticking to the exercise and you are not. Now, yeah, exactly. And I call this like, you can predict the future. Now, if you can predict the future, then I'm going to give you my lottery ticket, and you can fill it in a few times for me, and then I can retire and teach as much as I want. But the only way that you can make this work is because there's an agreement, and you have information up front. You will never have that in a real life situation. He's there, you're there, you both have a weapon in hand, go. Okay, so what's going to happen in the next second? You tell me. You don't know? That's what we're training for. So I'm very strict about certain things, that's why I wanted to ask about your teacher, so I can guess that he's had more than his share of those kind of moments with students that you're like, what the hell?
And I recognize it in the first book I have, actually. His kind of interview, if you like, when new people would come, especially if somebody was like flying in or driving up from LA or something like that to come and train with him. He'd always have a first session, and I write about it in the book. But I don't know, I'll share it with you because I don't think you had time to read all the way through. So he would say to me, I realized this after a while, that first of all he'd say, so there's this guy coming in on Saturday to train, and I'd be like, cool, But what I realized was then I meant to sort of hang out, and I was like, do you want me to come? He's like, yeah. Why don't you come? Okay, sure. So I'd be like, I have no idea what's going on, right? That would be all I'd get.
Yep.
So I'd turn up, and he'd always ask me to come a little bit earlier than the guy was going to turn up, right? So I'm sitting on one of the couches in the room, and dude would turn up, and he's like, oh, very nice to meet you, Maestro. And he's like, don't call me Maestro, I'm just Sonny. Okay, sir. No, just Sonny, blah, blah, blah. Chat. And he's like, this is mine. And they'd go, chick on the couch, quick wave, completely ignore me, and then start with Sonny again. And they'd talk a little bit, and, he's like, okay, well, here's a aluminium training blade, and I'm going to have one. Let's move around. He's like, don't kill me too quickly, And so they'd sort of move around, and the guy would be obviously super nervous, right, and trying to create a good impression, had no idea what he's meant to do, right? So immediately, deep end. No, no, like, do this and stand there and be a good student. This was like, who are you? Right? Yeah. Blah, 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 blah. They'd go for a little bit, and I'd be sitting there, and then somebody'd be like, I really need to have a fag, right? I really need to have a cigarette, right? Go, so Maija, why don't you flow with, person X for a while? So, all right, yeah, sure, And dudes are kind of like, all right, I'll flow with a girl. So we'd be moving around. And I was like, I'm like mimicking exactly what Sonny, because we'd had no conversations about what was meant to happen or what was going to go on or anything. So I'm just kind of giving the guy openings, doing exactly what Sonny was doing. And then Sonny would look over at me occasionally, and he'd go like this, like when the guy's back was turned, but only I could see it. And so then I'd start like kind of tagging him a little bit as we were moving, like not in any hurry, just kind of like, oh, look, there's a cut. And he would watch the guy's reaction. Yeah. Because he's now put him in a psychologically, possibly one of the worst positions for a young man to be in, is getting beaten by a girl in front of the teacher. And he wanted to see which way the interaction was going to go. He wanted to see if the guy was going to start hitting back hard, if he was going to stop, if he was going to be too polite, if he was going to be like, oh, wow, that's interesting. How are you doing that? Like what was coming out. And that was his interview. And a bunch of people never came back after that.
Yeah. Well, every teacher kind of has a selection procedure when somebody new comes join the class, and I think that's a pretty good one. I know of one guy who used to do interviews when he was hiring somebody, and he'd have the people drive him somewhere. While they were driving, he'd ask the questions, because then you're like, your true colors tend to come out when you're under stress like that in traffic or something happens. That's brilliant. Yeah, so it's a little bit of a similar thing here. It's like, just play with her a little bit, and I'm just smoking my cigarette. Nothing's going on. Keep going. Yeah, and I have to say that this was one of the most amazing lessons that I learned from him. Was at first I was a little bit annoyed. I'm like, oh my God, he's totally using sexism, like as a tool to do this. It's like, how dare he, and rah rah. And then I was like, this is a really good lesson. He's using the other person's probable attitude to the interaction, like their preconceptions as something. And he was the first person that told me that being underestimated can be a good thing. Yeah. And that it's fine. Let people underestimate you and use that against them. Like, you're never going to convince somebody that you're 6'5", built really big and dangerous. So what do you have that you can use to your advantage? And that was a really fascinating thing. I was like, oh, you're really smart. You're just using human psychology to get what you want.
And in the end, that turned out to be pretty much most of his system, was how to play the person. Like, the technique was secondary. It was, how do you make the other person do what you want them to do?
Well, I wanted to ask you about that, and it's kind of switching topics a bit. In the foreword of your book, there's mentioned that Sonny went through several phases in creating a system. And could you talk a little bit about those phases, what they were like, but also how they differed from each other, and where you kind of ended up?
I mean, I only experienced the last phase. I
Yep.
experienced the random flow phase. But if you, again, there's probably Filipino historians of martial arts that will get on my case. I'm really only telling you what I understand from my experience and what Sonny said, is that very, very old school, traditionally, the way Filipino martial arts were taught, like family style martial arts and stuff, is your uncle took you into the back garden, gave you a rattan stick, and started to beat the shit out of you. And the only instruction was, don't get hit. Like, that was it. You know, in a sense, this was kind of like a hazing thing to see which kid had the grit, you know, like old school, to tough it out. And they were going to be like warrior class or whatever, you know. But also, that was the idea. You're learning defense first, right? And there was no structure. And Sonny would say to me often, I'm not teaching you, I'm showing you what I do. After that, it's for you to take it and make it yours. So I think that is a very old-fashioned way of teaching martial arts. It's like, if you fail, it's not my fault. It's like, here, these are all the things that work for me. Now, here, if you can use them, fantastic. I am generous enough to give them to you because I like you, but don't blame me if this shit doesn't work. And if you look at a lot of Filipino systems, you'll see that they all have many names. Like, it's always like the person who's doing its name. But that's why. It's like, you can't say, like, this is this person's art. It's like, this is my art, right? It comes from this lineage maybe, or, you know, whatever. But it's you take ownership of what you do. So there's that very old traditional way. But then I guess one of the big influences in the Philippines was the Japanese structure of martial arts. This idea of outfits and uniforms and people standing in a line and doing things, and schools and whatever. And that influenced a lot of teaching, I think, at a certain point, kind of, you know, during that era, sort of like the second half of the 20th century. And so that's a little bit of what you see in schools still now, is there is a little thing that you have to wear, and, you know, there are solo drills, and then everything's kind of more codified and organized, and you can teach more students at a time. You could teach like a room full of people. So when Sonny first came to the United States, he codified a system in a very similar way. He's like, level 1 is you have to learn these things, you know, kind of like belt ranks. You know, it's like, once you get those, then this is the next level. And if you get this, it'll mean this level, you know. And he wrote it out very much like that. And I think at first he taught it. But like around the time when I started, not that much before, in the previous couple of years, what he realized was that most of the people that he was teaching, when they started sparring, none of the stuff had come out. It was like there was a huge disconnect between the material and the usage. So there was a gap where it's like, why isn't any of the stuff that I'm teaching, all these amuras and combinations and blah, 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 why isn't it manifesting? And his kind of genius insight was that nobody was learning tactical thinking. Nobody was putting it in context. Nobody was putting it in time, where what you did was because the previous thing had happened, right? It's like you act because you're always reacting on some level, right? Even if you preempt the attack, you're still reacting to a threat. So there's always something that is causing behavior. And if you don't play in time, where stuff can come out of time, like in a moment, you're never going to be able to see it, because you're always going to be behind, like it's already happened. So he created this random flow method to create that scenario where you started to have to read the opponent and then also make them do things, which he called writing. And you can't make people move to the left or the right or block high or whatever unless you can give them something that they're really reacting to, not just pretending because that's what they're meant to do. So that was it. a lot of the material in there is actually the same. It's just that all the combinations of stick hits or whatever will appear in real life because people's reactions tend to be a certain way. It's like, you know, if I come right and they block, I'm going to go left. You know, that's a simple, you know, simple way of thinking about it. So 1, 2, if you think about that as a combination, happens because there's a reason.
Yeah.
Right. So the material essentially hasn't really changed that much, apart from that he started focusing on sword instead of impact weapons. Totally sword by the time I started teaching, pretty much. Apart from cane and some short blade and some sickles and some other things, but it was like not stick, basically. Sword was primary. So, and there's a reason for that, which we can talk about. But that's why, is to give it context.
And what I always wondered then is I mean, this sounds like a method, obviously, that only can work in a mostly one-on-one or small group setting as a teacher, because you have to spend like a fair bit of time just working together. Otherwise, I mean, you can't do it solo. And the other aspect is, what I've experienced is that students who have some sort of free work, sparring, free flow, however you want to call it, and if it reaches a certain intensity, and sometimes even when it doesn't, but especially when you get to a higher intensity level, if they haven't learned a lot yet, they tend to develop in a very specific direction once they get hit a few times. That, for instance, I've had once somebody who came to my class who'd been sparring elsewhere, and in one of those clubs where, like, you know, first class, they beat you up, and then, you know, put your gloves on, get in the ring, and just beat the crap out of you. And he developed this aversion, obviously, to getting hit, but he couldn't get over what was at that point hardwired into his brain because of the adrenal dump and the way that your brain learns under that kind of stress. He just couldn't get basic technique in him anymore. So he would default to these primitive patterns of movement, and he couldn't access the higher regions of his brain anymore as a result. And I've seen something along those lines happen many times. And that's one aspect. And the other aspect is, how do you, well, no, maybe let's talk about that first, because otherwise it's too much.
So one of the big misunderstandings is that random flow is either preset flow, as you see in some arts like Balintawak. It's like there's various combinations that come out and you just do them faster and faster, and maybe you add a few different options in there. And sparring is random flow is neither of those things. Random flow is an agreement to basically move a certain pace, like we're both moving together. It's a little bit like when you do applications, we both have to move as though we are moving at the same speed, a little bit like Rory's one-step drills. It's like, it doesn't matter. If I'm doing a whole bunch of things and you're just doing one, it means suddenly I've become superhuman and moving 3 times the speed that it's possible, right? So you figure out a speed where you can move and do stuff, and then stuff happens.
Yeah.
So the whole premise is that I don't know what's going to happen next.
Yeah.
That is the premise, is that stuff happens and I can't predict it. At first, I have no idea what's going to happen. So it's like you start from a position of not knowing and starting to recognize. And you work at the pace that the student's nervous system can actually intake that information. And one of Sunny's gifts, and you're right, it's like you have to do this with a person that knows how to, at least to a certain level, is that I can work with everybody right at the level where they start to lose their focus. And Sunny would do that with us.
Yep.
So every time I kind of got like, okay, I can see this, he would speed up a little bit or do something, and I'd be like, oh man, now I have no idea what's happening. But slowly over time, his idea was that you have to build in the focus so that your adrenal dump doesn't happen. Yep. He would talk about them like freezing points. So a freezing point is pretty much where your adrenaline kicks in, or when you get the fight, flight, freeze response, right? That you kind of lose your conscious ability and default to your, the others. And so he's like, I want to get rid of your freezing points when your nervous system just flashes and either makes you completely stop dead, or makes you flail, or makes you cringe, or makes you hit harder, or whatever it is, right? He wanted to work right at the level where it was just about to go there, but wasn't. So it wasn't about speed, but it was about feeding reality at maybe 3/4 speed or 2/3 speed, and then like turning up the volume button, if that makes sense. And
Yeah,
that's the skill.
I think I see what you mean, and so as I understand what you just said, it's more like gradually increasing the difficulty level and perhaps the speed as well, and that's I mean that's a great approach. I use something similar myself, and I think it works just great. Would you end up eventually getting to like live speed,
Oh yeah.
actual combat speed? I
Well,
mean,
the whole point is that you're learning stuff within context. So you're
yeah,
learning skill sets. So that's what random flow is like, there's a theme, say, for the week. There's this blade manipulation or this kind of idea of entry about like you touch the blade and immediately you go to the hand, or touch the blade and immediately to the head. Like one of these, you got like a thing that maybe you start practicing.
yeah,
Starts off super easy and blah, 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 blah. And then at the end of the class, especially if there was a few other people there, we would circle around. But your job was within sparring, and the primary, not getting hit, which was always the point, was can you pull this off whilst not getting hit?
yeah,
You might have read it that Sonny's base theory that I think everything is based on in his system is that it's not that hard to kill someone with a blade. It's really takes no skill to walk up to somebody and just stab them. Do you know what I mean? Like there's the human. That's why blades are designed, because human beings are.
A 5-year-old can do it.
Yeah, I can literally walk and do nothing as long as I hit somebody on the way, and it's going to happen. Zero skill. So there's no skill in killing somebody. He says there's also no skill in dying. He said that you don't have to practice at all. It'll happen when you're not even looking. He says, but the skill is in getting away, in living, in not dying. And he says, for him, martial arts was about the not dying part. The other part takes care of itself. Be in the right place at the right time, it's not hard. I mean, I'm not talking psychologically,
I get it. Yeah.
This is like physically, right? And so that's what we spent our time doing. It's like, all right, here's the skill. You've got to try and find their blade at some point and see if you can, touch their body. But your main job is you've always got to not get hit while you're doing it. Like that's the point. But you still have to try. And so the sparring happened where we were really actually trying to tag people.
Yeah.
So then we did get to the sparring level. But if it started to get too out of control and now we're just trading hits, he'd be like, all right, stop it. Now you've got to sit down. That's not the point.
That is one of the main reasons why I don't spar with many weapons, many people with weapons, because I found it exceptionally rare to have people that have exactly that mindset. Is that it's going well, we go faster, add some speed and strength in there, start landing with some reasonably effective strikes that would get the job done in real life, and then somebody's ego gets out of hand and they start doing that kind of nonsense. We're like, yes, you killed me, but you died yourself, or you just took a sword to the gut, or I just cut your hamstring as you were decapitating me. It's fine. Okay, you can call that a win. Congratulations, you're handicapped for life, but by all means.
Are we choosing to train for not being able to walk again? I mean, is that our highest goal? Do you also get the people that say, "Oh, I'd take that hit"?
Yeah. Well, I've said that a few times, but not in a situation where weapons were involved.
Well, yeah, I mean, I get that a lot where people are like, oh, yeah, but you just tag my hand or something like that, or blah, 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 blah. I was like, okay. So I'm going to show you a photo that's in this book. So if anybody's squeamish, don't look. Can I show it?
Yeah.
It's a hand cut.
Yeah.
It's like, if that's your choice, like that is what we're aiming for. Okay, but let's try and train for that not to happen. How about that? It's like, if you're content that your level is fine, the job isn't, okay, that's actually an interesting point, right? You were saying, it's like, I killed you, yes, but you died also. That implies that the killing is more important than the living.
Yeah.
And that is the stupid part that Sonny saw. And that was his whole thing, is like, yeah, but you're not here to kill somebody, you're here to negate the threat. And whatever that is, and I think that's one of the other interesting things about his system that I think now it's kind of transfers, like you were saying, to his life experience, is about stopping the fight way early on, and kind of crosses a little bit into that sort of self-defense sort of region.
Yeah, yeah.
He got out of plenty of altercations by just pulling out his Barley songs and doing something super fancy with them. Because then the guy was like, yeah, no.
Yeah, which we are often told does not work.
Exactly. But behind it was somebody that could, right? It's not that it's your skill and that's the only one you have. It's like you can't bluff somebody that's kind of like, okay, so you have to understand that. But the whole point is that if I'm aware enough to avoid the danger, that's not getting hit. If I can pass an interview and them decide not to, that's not getting hit too.
Yeah.
It's like there's a whole way of not getting hit that is not necessarily defensive. It can be offensive too. If I knock you out and you're not a threat to me, I've still not got hit, right? Or if I completely take you out of the game, technically that's me not getting hit either. It's all the same. And he didn't see any difference because his whole thing was there's always two people involved. There's no martial arts without another human being, and the other human being has a computer, has a brain. And it's like you influence that or you hit that or you influence with your psychology just as much as you do anything physical.
Yeah.
No,
makes sense. And something else that I wanted to ask you. So he started when he was teaching in the US with a very kind of like structured system and so on. And you just said before that, well, all that stuff would come eventually. It would happen during the flow because there would be a reason for it. How do you make sure that everything that eventually gets taught, or is that even something that is on your mind?
Remember, I never learnt the old system, like what's in it. I've read through it because I have a copy of some of the stuff he wrote down, and it's like it's not hard to pick up. You're like, oh yeah, that's familiar, or that's familiar. It's not that complicated, and it's not a question of learning stuff. It's like if you can like go one-on-one with me with blades, and you can repeatedly get me without me getting you. You don't need to learn anything from me. But like with Sonny, it's like if I could escape an altercation where he could really get me, then I'd learned something. That was it. Yeah. It's just that, and that's what he meant by I'm going to show you what I do. So he would get more and more tricky over time, more and more devious, and playing with your head. He used to shit talk all the time. It's like everything, right? He would lie through his teeth at you. He's all like, oh, that left hand's open, I'm going to go hit that left hand. No, he wasn't. It's like you had to learn to really focus on what was a threat, what wasn't, cut out the bullshit and do the thing, right?
Yeah.
When you could do the thing, then he'd get trickier, and now you had the next level. So it's like everybody that comes, it's like we'll get a certain level and then they'll keep getting better. And by the time you can beat me, not just like a haha, I got you once, but if I really can't get a touch on you and you really can on me, then I don't have anything, So that's what the system is. Go to somebody else who's like that,
And if you would compare, the way that you teach now compared to how you learned from Sonny, is there a difference? Is it the same? How would you compare it?
Well, Sonny died in 2006. I have no idea how much more there was to learn. So there's a definite feeling that there was more. So I don't know.
Yeah.
But since his death, all right, so he wanted everybody that trained with him to teach. He didn't teach that many people, right? Mm. And so it was kind of assumed that you were going to. And he got diagnosed with brain cancer about 6 months before he died. He basically had a stroke, and they said, all right, yeah, it's metastasized. You're not going to live. So he had 6 months. So we were around him while he was, kind of going downhill. But we would train at his house. He had like one of those medical beds in hospice set up there, and we would just play because it was his life, and he kind of liked seeing people move around and stuff like that. One of the last things he said to me was, he's all like, don't teach preset patterns, don't teach drills. Okay. And then he died, which is also weird because he actually died on the morning of my first class that I was going to have in the evening in the Screamer, which was, I know, bastard. His timing was always really on point. Fucker. Sorry, I keep swearing.
Oh, it's fine. It's fine.
So don't teach any preset drills. Fuck, how do you do that? Right? So my time since then and now has to work out how to do that. Yeah. It's like, how do I make it so that two people that don't really know what they're doing can play with each other? Like, is there a way that, how do I throw concepts out into the universe of how to structure this randomness of the flow and get people to do it. I mean, I don't think still people can necessarily do it without training with me at some point, just to kind of get the idea, honestly, I suppose. But what I found is that this is one of those, Sunny's system, if you like, or way or method can be added to any martial art. It doesn't have to be Filipino. It's, if you have a whole bunch of Chinese weapons forms and we flow, you'll see why you have to use most of them. There's a group that I trained that does Bagua and Xingyi and Taiji. And it's interesting because they have a bunch of weapon forms with no idea what they're for.
Yeah.
You know, they have the applications, but they're like, well, why does this happen? And we could talk about it. You know, I trained some HEMA guys. So they also have a whole bunch of stuff from old texts, but they don't really get the tactical thinking perhaps behind it. So in a sense, you know, what I've realized and how I've come to understand it is I still stick to Sunny's idea of don't get hit as being the principal value that I'm teaching. But it's pretty much like, can you have me not touch you when we play? Like that's the deal, you know? It's like, can you not die? And you know, that's all I can really offer, just like Sunny offered that to me. It's like, I'm going to teach you how to not die, and I'm going to pull out every trick I have in the book and try it on you. And I'm going to try and make you see as many different like varieties of fighting personality, movement paradigms, all this stuff that he had in him. He'd show me these different fighting personalities that he could fight with and see if I could deal with them. And then, of course, my job is to create my own fighting personalities and all the different ways of being tricky and nefarious, and do that on my students and see if they fall for my tricks and, you know, get them to, you know, do it. And then their job is to go play with a lot of people and see if they can, if this helps. And that is really the proof of it. You know, it's like, take it back to your HEMA friends or your Chinese martial art friends or whatever and see if it makes a difference. Or your fencing friends or your Filipino friends. It's like, now when you spar, is it easier to spar? Now when you spar, do you take less hits? Do you get more hits on your opponent? You know, do you actually do the thing in boxing where it's like you can hit and not get hit? So that's how I've evolved in my thinking, because he gave me such a strict request.
How could you say no?
Yeah, you can't say no, but it's incredibly difficult. I mean, how do you not teach preset techniques? How do you not?
I have no answer for that, because I do.
A caveat, honestly, is that there's a whole bunch of solo practice that you can do to get better, to increase your skill sets. And those were not counted. Like you can practice certain things with people where there's no tactical thinking. You know, people are giving you something and you can practice stuff, right? So there's a sort of an agreement. But every time you're actually really trying to do, you have to always put it into really having to try and do it without there being somebody giving it to you or blah, 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 blah. So there is stuff, but it's never repetitive. As soon as I teach somebody how to deal with like a number one overhand right cut, they don't know if it's going to be from the overhand right or the overhand left. That's immediately. There's going to be a piece of uncertainty in there. Always, 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 always. So uncertainty is the big piece, I guess.
Okay.
Does that answer the question? I kind of rambled on there.
No, that's a great answer. I'm going to pause for a second because we're going to have to relocate. Hold on. All right. So we had this little break for the podcast listeners and the viewers on YouTube because my computer was going to give out, and I'm just checking to see if everything is working. It says recording. Now we're good to go. No, that was a great answer. So that was mostly what I was curious about. I teach in a very different manner with a lot of structure, a lot of curriculum, and a lot of room to go through several phases in your progress, and also lots of drills. Some very structured, a lot of them very free, and then a lot of free work as well. But the goal is that by the time you get to the free work, that you're doing something decent, as opposed to, like what we mentioned before, people just whacking at each other with weapons or just punching and kicking as if, they're not going to get hit. And as I get older, that is obviously more and more in my mind, is that how do I structure this so I get to a result? And I've seen all kinds. I've seen people who with like zero structure, just everything is like sparring. become incredibly efficient, and then people who did zero sparring and incredibly structured training be equally efficient. So for me, that always fascinates me. Okay, how did you get there? And because you're doing something so different from me, but it's clear that you know what you're doing and it's working,
Well,
regardless of the art or the person.
well, I mean, I will say that it's, like Rory Miller's One Step. It's sort of part of it's built on the idea that the human body is actually fairly smart,
Yeah.
and that you can train the nervous system quicker than you can train the brain, the conscious brain. So you're actually training things that are already inbuilt. Steve Morris also talks about this a lot, about how the human brain is pretty good. And if I use a kind of a foolish example, but if I throw a ball at your head, mostly you're going to get out of the way, or maybe you're going to get nailed a few times and then you're going to start doing something. I don't teach you how to do that. You're just like, oh, this is coming at my head, I'm going to move. Instead of saying, okay, we're going to practice this move where you're going to lean left, move your head over and blah, 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 and then try and do it with the timing. His whole idea is that maybe Sonny's didn't talk about it explicitly, but the idea is that if you teach human beings to really see what's dangerous, you're throwing threats at them, they'll actually, they've got a lot of inbuilt smartness in there that you can then enhance and do some of the more counterintuitive things like closing in on something instead of running away, for instance, that we have to do in martial arts. But that the incentive to change is inbuilt. It's like if you take getting hit as a loss, like if you can really ingrain that in yourself, that that was me not getting it well enough is when I get hit, I am going to change behavior. So when Sonny would say train with somebody that was really aggressive, for a long time he didn't let them play with anybody else. It would be just him. And basically he would just kind of break their ego down. And he's all like, stop taking those hits, stop taking the hits. It's like, oh, I got you again. One of his favorites to get people to move was to hit somebody on their backside, because it's super embarrassing. The other thing he'd do to me if I was too close, he would actually put the sword in the other hand and then touch my forehead with his elbow. Like, oh yeah, that's really stupid, isn't it? So he would use the ego as the entry point into making you smarter and to focus more. And so then he would inbuild this stuff, like you actually got really good at just like watching stuff and then moving with it instead of being that sort of organized about it. And then separate to that, you had all the warm-up exercises. Have you heard this in Chinese arts, that the warm-up exercises is actually the most important part because you do them every time? It was kind of the same way. It's like if you do these, your balance will get better, your flexibility will get better, your body coordination and alignment will get more integrated, blah, blah, blah. Solo practices, just warm-ups, just do some of this, right? But then in context, you did that separately. So then your ability to track and to understand how you can move somebody became, more real-time practice. So anyway.
Excellent. All right, I'm going to switch tacks again. I want to talk about the books.
Yes.
So you've written 2 books, The Liar, the Cheat, and The Thief, Deception and the Art of Swordplay. And the second one is The Hustler, Swordplay, and the Art of Tactical Thinking. Let's start with The Liar and the Cheat and Thief. Well, I mean, I am sorely remiss in that I haven't read them. They have been in my Kindle for a while, and I have a huge backlog in videos to watch and books to read. And I have to apologize that I didn't get to it before I got to talk to you. But
it's fine. I'm not offended.
Okay, then I'm happy. Could you just give the people who nice? So for the people on the podcast who are listening, Maija is showing a picture of Sonny and his wall that is very impressively decorated with like weapons, like it's filled to the rim.
The interesting thing is that he made or modified most of these weapons that are on the wall.
Nice.
So everything that came into his hands, he would alter to fit him and to move better, to fit his style of fighting, which was fascinating. He hated that photo, by the way. He said, it makes me look like a shopkeeper.
Okay. Well, he posed for it, so.
Well, whatever.
Kind of like give me the Cliff Notes version of what the book is about for the people who haven't read it.
Well, this was my first attempt, written in 2014, I think. So basically, 8 years after Sonny died, about a little bit about what it was like training with him. There's a bunch of vignettes in there about my time training with him, like the story I was saying about the ringer, about me with the new students is in there. A couple other ones too, a few other ones actually. And then the rest of the book is actually drills. This one's really meant for people that train. So it's got a bunch of physical exercises in it. So there's like basic cuts and feeding.
Yeah.
Shoulder tag and evasion with long blade. Like there's a whole bunch of things here to practice that are non-traditional ways of working with blades. And, you know, so for people to kind of think about their partner practice in a slightly different way. And you can pretty much insert any material into it from the Philippines or elsewhere and see if maybe some of the drills will help your sparring or whatever. So it's not necessary a book to be read so much as, I mean, yeah, sure, it's to be read, but like half of it is drills. So it's a real kind of for practitioners, if you like.
Yeah.
And it was my best attempt at how do I teach this art with no preset patterns or drills.
Yeah.
So that's what this is. There's a series of videos that goes with it. There's a link in the book. So there's like 42 video clips that go with all the drills. So I demo all the drills in the video too, with Greg Manalo, who was also another student of Sonny's. So nice. That was my first attempt.
Well, I think it's a great idea because then people have both, you know, the drill in the book. They've got the explanation. They can watch the video, and then, you know, go out and train, do it.
Yeah. So it's like this is the preamble, and then this is all the drills.
Yeah, so it's like
is drills.
1/3 preamble and 2/3 drills. If I'm guessing
with
that right.
stories and reasons and what we're getting and stuff like that. But yeah.
That's pretty cool. You know, and as a fellow writer, I would like to ask this question because I get it a lot. What would you change now if you would write the book now? Is there anything you would change? Write the second one.
The first one pretty much blurted out of my head.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. It was like, I wrote it. We filmed all the drills in this book in a day, me and Greg.
Nice.
But there's most of them on a first take. We just like did it because it was all in there waiting to come out. So that's kind of how my books tend to be. It's just like then they exit. The second book started because a friend of mine invited me or said, why don't you come and talk at this martial art conference in LA? 1919, I guess it was. And it was one of those talks where you have to talk for a certain amount of time and stuff. And so I was driving in my car on my way to work, speaking out loud, because I had no idea how long things take when you talk. So I was trying to craft a perfectly formed story arc to fit in whatever it was, 25 minutes or half an hour. I can't remember, whatever the time was, right? And I suddenly realized that there was a book in it, because all the stuff that I had to explain, which isn't, I mean, it's kind of like the same book, but it's not the same. It's more kind of high level concepts. It's about the mindset and like bigger general concepts about fighting strategy and stuff. Were kind of like a preamble to the drills book. It's like, oh, if you don't get this way that human beings, you know, think or are integral to this, maybe you're not going to really understand, you know, the physicality. So that's what this one became. So this. So
and just for the people listening, so that's The Hustler, Swordplay, and the Art of Tactical Thinking. And I will have direct links to where you can buy that book. Go to wimsblog.com/61, number 61, and you'll find the links there. And then you have to buy the book. Okay, don't be like me. Don't wait to read it. Buy it now. Read it now. Okay, so that was my ad. It's done. Go ahead, Maija.
Yeah, and so I think this is a good overview about why the whole system is like it is, because it's actually very simple. It's like you have a goal, and the goal is to go home. That's it. It's like you're going to be faced with something that you have to deal with, and you go home. And like I said before, the one thing that is constant in every interaction is the human being at the other end. And the human being isn't only their weapon. It's their body type. It's their personality. It's their psychology. It's their culture. And all these things, it turns out, are affordances that you can use. I said earlier that one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about sword as being very specific, and why I think Sunny switched only to doing sword, is that you can take some damage with impact weapons. Yep. They're not as dangerous. You can take a few hits on the way in, and you'll probably get some hits from sword. It's not like you're going to stop fighting, but, the sword gives you the biggest incentive not to take damage. And this is this whole thing about don't take damage, or how much damage should you take, right? And if we do go on the premise of the don't get hit because I don't want to take damage, it opens up the possibilities of, oh no, what can I do? It's this idea of starting from disadvantage in a sense, where the risk is super high and the only reward is not getting hit, right? So it skews the playing field for you to be super creative. It also takes power out of the equation. So it doesn't matter how strong I am, how big I am. Yeah. I don't care if you're 6'5" and 250 and well trained. You can't hit me unless you put your hand close enough to me, and I can take that hand off. And so it has this interesting effect where people that are women, for instance, like me, or that are smaller or weaker or less able or slower, suddenly now can start to think like, well, okay, this is stacked against me. What do I do? Yeah. So it forces your creativity, I guess, in a way that sticks or empty hand doesn't necessarily do. And one of the biggest insights that I had actually from the talking in the car thing was this idea of damage. You know how they're always going on about men and women's skill levels? It's like women are just as good as men. It's like, well, technique-wise, maybe. But the reason why you're always at a disadvantage is that I can take less damage than you can. Like you, Wim, you've got a bit of,
I'm not lightweight.
You can take a few hits. Look at your neck's bigger than mine. Your hand. Like everything. And it's like to take me out is like a one-shot deal. Could be for you, unless they get like a tiny area of your body. It's going to take way more than that. But on me, there's way more options. There's way more options of taking me out of the game than there are on you. And so, again, from disadvantage, like what is the mindset that you have to use? And the reason why the book's called The Hustler, apart from the fact that Sunny was a champion hustle dancer, hustle being a dance from the 80s, a partner dance from the 80s, is that you want to take the mindset of a pickpocket or a thief. That this is why it's also called The Liar, the Cheat, and the Thief. In that what makes pickpockets good is that the other person didn't know it's happened and you've already left the scene. That is success. That's what success is not being found out, is not being touched, not being, confronted. So that's what the whole premise comes from.
Yeah. Excellent. And I understand that. Just give me like a really quick explanation of what a full book is about. It's always difficult, but I wanted to have you talk a little bit about it so that people get, firsthand the point of view of the author and again, not be stupid like me and wait too long to read it. Just go out and get it. Because there's precious few books that talk about that subject, in my opinion. If there are, I've missed them, but I haven't found many. So that's why I like that.
Sorry? There's a gap, right? There's a gap in the market. Yeah. It's like it was the part that was missing for me. It was the part that was missing for me before I met Sunny. Yeah. It's the part that I see is missing. I also talk about how this thinking also maybe gives an insight into the eternal debate about whether traditional Chinese martial arts are real and good compared to ring sports, and showing why perhaps you're missing the point. And it also talks about how to play people and about how human beings are actually fairly predictable. So it's not just talking about the mindset, but it's there is some how-to in there too, and some things to play with.
Well, that's one of the issues that really, is for me. And I've got a friend who we've been talking and writing online and via email for decades now. And we got started off by having this huge argument online, like almost flame war levels for the people who are old enough to remember that term. And eventually we became great friends. To this day, we talk almost every day. And we had a lot of discussions about, exactly that kind of issue. One of the big topics that we always got back to, and especially when it comes to weapons, is that the training that you have, it needs to work out of the box. That's one aspect. but it also needs to set you up for whatever you learn later. So whatever is coming down the road, like you as the teacher know that, but the student doesn't. So it shouldn't be contradictory. It shouldn't be something that, well, you can do this now, but once you're advanced enough, you can forget about this and we'll teach you the real stuff.
Yeah.
I don't think that's a good method. So that is another aspect. But the main point that I wanted to ask you about is, I call it primal fear, which is something that is, I don't think you can teach it. I think you can give glimpses of it. I think you can explain how it works, why it happens, but it's just like you cannot know what it's like to have the bullets whizzing past your head until it happens. And every law enforcement officer, soldier goes through basic training and you know, goes through something that gets you really close, but never really there. And I have my own experiences, and I've talked to so many people who have theirs, and the same thing is that when it happens, a new world opens. It's a new dimension that opens, and then your training needs to be adapted to that dimension that you didn't know what it was like. You knew it's this, you know, mirage in the air that is this mystical place, real violence and lethal force that they talk about, but you're like, okay, well, I guess I know what it is. What I've seen is that a lot of the material that people learn under less than, you know, high intensity levels, you can get really good at it. And then once it's for real, it's for keeps, then all of a sudden it either doesn't work, or different things are needed, or certain aspects, all of a sudden they understand why it's so important that you had to do it that way. But as long as you're working with practice weapons, you're using gloves, you're using rules, you're using an octagon or a ring or whatever, it's irrelevant. You can ignore it completely. And it's that primal fear thing, I think, that drives most of it, is that, okay, it's your ass is on the line now. One mistake, you die. That's it. Or you're crippled for the rest of your life.
Mm-hmm.
And not just you, maybe, but the person behind you that you're supposed to be protecting, they're going to die a horrible death as well. And this is a reality for a lot of people to this day. It's April 9th, 2021. It's a lot of people, millions of people live in this reality. And it was the reality for mankind throughout history.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
So how do you address that?
The main thing I'm going to say is that I've never had anything go further than I've definitely had a few potentially violent encounters that all I managed to avoid. They were kind of like those false positives. You're like, was something going to happen? You know, that kind of thing that we could talk about if you're interested. But one of the big things I took away from it was I forgot so much. You know, that was very, very interesting thing about what you do. And what really strikes me in that, yes, my training definitely got my adrenaline up and my fear response, my freezing point, as Sonny would say. And Sonny wanted you to work on that so you could recognize it and then move past it. And one of the best things I think that has worked for me when I've actually done very dangerous things, I used to ride a motorcycle for a really long time. I still do. And I used to horse ride, like international competition wise, and do kind of dangerous things cross country and stuff, is that you have to trust your technique. It's like you have to get out of the, oh shit, I could totally have this shit happen, and be all like, I understand how to do this and do the thing, right? You bring your focus back into just watching the moment. As Aldo Nardi's Real Duel, I don't know if you read his explanation of that. I thought it was fascinating. So Aldo Nardi, who was a very famous Italian fencer, kind of pre-World War II, around that era, he was, I think, an Olympic champion, world champion. He was like super highly skilled fencer. And somebody challenged him to a real duel. And he wrote this really interesting little thing about his experience, because he said when he started, he was flailing, like all his technique went out the window. Like, you know, suddenly this guy could really kill him, right? Yeah. And he said, I just had to realize that everything I knew was already in my body, and just to do the thing as though it wasn't like going to kill me. Do you know what I mean? Like, just, you know how to deal with this. Like, he had to, there was like a mental switch that he had to like cut out the noise. And that to me has been super useful for some of the stuff. It's like, you know, to trust your intuition is huge. Not to feel stupid and to cut out the noise. But what would I do in a real deal? I mean, I think I would probably do something like that. I would, you know, I'd have to throw that switch that I kind of recognize now, but I think it's that case of actually recognizing it that is difficult for some people if they've never even kind of come close to it. So I agree. You can show glimpses, but I don't think you can ever really train for it.
It's very hard. The reason why I bring it up is that my son is almost 19. He's into MMA, and I've been training for a while. And I'm about to be 49, so there's some stuff that I can show him still. But I was emailing a friend about that, and I said, look, you know, this is something that I'm going to have to teach him, and he's probably going to be the last person ever that I teach it, because I won't be able to do it anymore when I'm older. And it has to do with psychological aspects of fighting and so on. Is that because I won't be able to take the damage that he's going to have to put on me. So, and that's why it's something that I always look for, is that, okay, how do you get to that? And there's a lot of stuff that as a teacher, you know, we all bring our own experiences to what we teach. And that's also, like I said, why I asked about Sonny, you know, living the way he lived and booby trapping the house and that kind of stuff. The mindset those people have is just very different from just the average Westerner living in I don't know, the suburbs and having a nice, comfy life. So that's kind of where my interest always goes.
Yeah, I agree, absolutely. And I was incredibly lucky to train with somebody that really knew and that had real solutions to things. But what he taught me was how to read people really well, and then how to make them do things. And that is influence from a distance. And so, you know, unless you're getting ambushed and the ambush actually was successful, there's always a little element of time. You know, if it's a failed ambush, there's very little time. You just have to be in it already. But if somebody's walking towards you down the street, that's when it starts. When they see you and have that like, you know, once you ping somebody else's radar, you can influence that as long as you are participating also in the moment. There's a whole bunch of things that you can do to play with people, right? And it turns out that because we're social creatures, you know, we're basically apes still. You know, there's a huge part of us that is reacting. I smile, you smile, you know, I yawn, you know, somebody else will yawn, that kind of stuff. Is that we have these things that we can play with, you know, and a lot of those soft skills, I think, I learned actually sword sparring, weirdly.
Yeah.
Because like I said, Sonny would talk a lot while he was doing it, which is brilliant because it actually made you have to separate the two parts of your brain. Like I can talk and start watching you and see if I can make you do something, and I can take care of what you're physically doing by not even thinking about it. So it gives you that ability to separate, you know, left and right, just like a magician, you know, or just like a hand person. It's like, oh, look at that, but really it's over here. Not on a physical level, but like a psychological level. I can make you stop and think, you know, like bouncers, don't they always make somebody start to talk when they hit them? It's very similar sort of idea. When somebody's thinking about an answer, that's when you deck them because they've forgotten that they're going to hit you.
Yeah. One of the things my MMA students hate about me is that when we spar and they land something on me, I say, great. And then I'm going to hit them with the exact same thing right back. They know it's coming. They know that I mean it when I say, that's great. That's well done. Here's the same thing back to you. And for me, it's then, okay, Wim, you got to be able to land that one. You know, they know it's coming. Everybody knows what you're going to do next, but it still needs to land.
Well, that's good. Needs to work. Your level of skill high. And I'll say one thing also about Sonny that he used to do that was non-verbal teaching, because we worked out in a tiny space. Honestly, it was like a tiny square. And it was only really the corners of the squares we were actually physically out of range. Like you had to keep moving. And if he stopped, never stop in range because he's going to hit you. Like he's going to explain something. If you're just kind of like stop and start staring, he's going to whack you. If he starts walking, you walk too. Because if you just kind of stand there and watch him approach, he's going to hit you. So there's a whole bunch of range stuff that was really interesting. Yeah. There's a whole bunch of mannerism stuff that was interesting. Like, you know, do you know what I mean? Like there's a lot of body language and body reading, and then also creating it in yourself to screw with somebody else that was interesting. You know, it's like trying to be a puppeteer. You're like, you know, what happens if I do this? You know, what do they do? You know,
Yeah.
his system was mostly about watching the other person. That was phase one, and nobody really thinks about that. They think about me,
Yeah.
what I'm going to do, and I'm going to win. It's me. I'm victorious. And really, they should be all like recognizing the situation, because that in a self-defense situation is really going to help you with your awareness. You're like, oh, I recognize this. Well, that feels weird. Or why are they circling off? Like, who's behind me?
Yeah.
You know, there's that sort of like feeling you get. Because I told people that after a while training with Sonny, I could feel my openings, like where I was open. I'm like, oh no, I'm open. They actually felt that there was wind blowing through it, like there was a draft, like it was a visceral feeling. And so, and it's interesting to me that you can get that without any like physical contact, like it's actually a sensation. You know, you get that like, oh shit, this is really bad, you know?
Yeah, yeah.
Or like,
No,
oh,
I agree.
committed there. You're like, oh no.
I know, I fully know what you mean, and also this kind of like you're in mid technique and like, oh no, this is going horribly wrong.
And there's a few solutions to that. There's a few like, if in doubt, you know, do this. It's your only chance.
Yeah.
So there's definitely some default things that you can teach people too. But
Awesome.
that awareness, I think, is what I think people's like, oh, they're just moving around, dancing around with swords. It's like, I'm playing with people, and it's again that human aspect I think that is super valuable about this training with Blade that people don't get, because it gets you out of your own head. And then I'm kind of like, what will make you uncomfortable? Like, how do I move that makes you kind of weirded out by what I'm doing, or makes you sort of pay attention and go, what are they doing? You know what I mean? Like, how can I change your brain by my physicality, or by what I say, or my rhythm, or, you know, it's fascinating stuff. And I think every good fighter does it, you know?
Yeah. Awesome. Awesome. All right. I'm just checking for time, and
I know we've been talking for ages. Sorry about that.
No. This is awesome. I'm very happy that you were able to take the time. I think we're pretty much at the end of all the questions I had for the main episode, and we're going to kind of like flow into the bonus podcast episode for my patrons, where they answer your questions. You answered their questions. Sorry, I messed that up. Where can people reach you, Maija? What is there a website? Is there something that you would like to point them to?
I have a Patreon page. It's Patreon.com/Art of Deception, where I put most of my material nowadays. Obviously the 2 books and the videos. There's also an old blog if you want to look at some of how my mind has kind of evolved over time, if you like. It's called Sword and Circle as one word, .blogspot.com. But that's really about it. I have a group also on Facebook for people that buy the videos if they want to ask me questions, though very few actually do. But my modern thoughts will go up on Patreon. Okay, excellent. All right. Well, again, like I said, we are going to stop recording the part for the main podcast and just keep going with Maija for all the questions. Sorry, go ahead. The secret questions.
Yes, the secret questions, and there's some really good ones in there as well. Everybody, I want you to go to wimswalker.com/61 for all the links to Maija's Patreon, the Sword and Circle blog, the books, everything will be there. And as always, thank you for listening to the podcast. Write me an awesome review. That would also be helpful. And then share it with everybody who wants to listen to this. That would be great. And go ahead.
YouTube, RNDMFLW is my channel. Just Google Sonny Umpard. You'll see the flow videos. There's not a huge amount, but if you want to see what it actually looks like, all those videos were taken from sessions because he videoed everything and we got to keep a copy. So those are literally taken straight out of my classes with him.
Awesome. Okay, I'll add that link also to the show notes. Then people can find it. Excellent. Well, a huge thank you to you, Maija. This was awesome, and I hope everybody got as much out of it as I did, because this was a really, really informative talk, and lots of stuff that I would love to go over in more detail. But then we'll talk for 5 hours, and people will say, like, Wim, we got to go to work. Wim, we got to go eat, and so on. So, no, awesome. This is great. Thank you very much.
Oh, you're welcome. Thank you.